Mark Anderson had conquered empires, but the janitor with the knowing smile had conquered him, and when she walked into his charity gala like royalty incarnate, every carefully constructed wall he'd built around his heart began to crumble, one devastating heartbeat at a time. If you're hooked and already, do well to support our work by subscribing to this channel, as it means a lot to us. Thank you. Now let's dive into the story. The invitation sat on Mary and Davy's cleaning cart like a grenade with a silk ribbon. Cream-colored cardstock, embossed lettering, the kind of paper that probably cost more than her weekly wages. She'd found it tucked beside the industrial-grade bleach, her name written in Mark Anderson's precise handwriting, Ms. Mary and Davies. Not Mary Ann, custodial staff. Not to whom it may concern. MS. She picked it up with gloved hands, careful not to leave fingerprints on something so pristine. The Anderson Global Holdings Annual Charity Gala. Black tie. The Dorchester. Next Saturday at 8. Well, she murmured to the empty executive corridor, isn't this interesting? It had been 3 years since she'd taken this job, 3 years of calculated invisibility punctuated by late-night conversations with a man who had no idea what he was really looking at. Mark Anderson saw a janitor with an education. He didn't see the daughter of Ghanaian diplomats who'd chosen this peculiar form of penance. He didn't see the woman who'd walked away from a corner office to understand what she'd become. Mary Ann had made herself invisible on purpose. But this invitation? This was Mark Anderson trying to make her visible in the most dangerous way possible. She thought of their last conversation, just 2 nights ago. He'd been working late again, he always worked late on Thursdays, had done so for 8 months now, ever since he'd realized Thursday was her shift on the executive floor. The man thought he was subtle. He wasn't. Question for you, he'd said, not looking up from his laptop. If you could have dinner anywhere in London, where would you go? Home, she'd replied, emptying his trash bin. A home-cooked meal is worth a dozen Michelin stars. That's a dodge. That's the answer. She'd paused, studying him. Why do you ask questions you already know the answers to, Mr. Anderson? He'd finally looked up then, and in his eyes she'd seen something that made her chest tighten. Longing. Confusion. The particular vulnerability of a powerful man realizing his power meant nothing in the space between two people. Maybe, he'd said quietly, I'm hoping one day you'll surprise me with an answer I don't expect. Careful what you wish for. Now, staring at this invitation, Mary Ann understood. This was his move. Clumsy, risky, wrapped in the pretense of a prank his executives could laugh about. She'd heard them talking, the CFO's cruel joke about the cleaning lady, the VP's warning about social suicide. They thought Mark was entertaining himself with a social experiment. They were wrong. Mary Ann set the invitation down and pulled out her phone. She had a call to make. If Mark Anderson wanted to play this game, she'd play. But by her rules. 3 days later, she handed him back the invitation. He was in his office, tie loosened, shirt sleeves rolled up, looking more human than Billionaire. When he saw what she was holding, something flickered across his face. Hope, maybe. Or fear. Your response, he asked, voice carefully neutral. She laid the invitation on his desk. On the back, in her elegant script, delighted. One word. That's all she'd written. But Mark Anderson stared at it like she'd handed him a treasure map. You'll come. I said I would. As a guest. Not as. I understand the invitation, Mr. Anderson. She met his gaze, let him see past the janitor's uniform for just a moment. Do you understand what you're really asking? The silence stretched between them, loaded with 3 years of late-night philosophy and unspoken truths. Finally, Mark smiled, and it transformed his entire face. No, he admitted. But I'm hoping to find out. Mary Ann nodded. Saturday at 8, then. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Mr. Anderson. You might want to prepare your friends. I have a feeling this evening won't go quite the way they're expecting." As she walked away, Mark Anderson sat alone in his office, staring at that single word, delighted, and wondering if he'd just made the best or worst decision of his life. What would you do if someone saw past your carefully constructed image? Let me know in the comments below. Mark Anderson's penthouse smelled like anxiety and expensive cologne. He'd changed ties 4 times, which was 3 times more than he'd ever changed ties for anything, including the meeting where he'd secured the merger that made him his first billionaire. "You're catastrophizing," he said in his reflection. The reflection looked unconvinced. His phone buzzed. A text from his CFO, "Gerald, still going through with your little experiment? The board's taking bets on how fast she runs." Mark deleted it without responding. Gerald was brilliant with numbers but had the emotional intelligence of a turnip. The experiment language had been Mark's own invention, his cowardice wrapped in boardroom speak. He'd let them think it was a prank because the truth, that he'd fallen for his janitor like a teenager with his first crush, would have been unthinkable. Except it wasn't a prank. Not to him. And he had the sinking suspicion it wasn't a prank to Marianne either. His driver, Thomas, had worked for him for 12 years and had perfected the art of judgmental silence. Tonight, as they pulled up to the Dorchester, Thomas broke protocol. "Sir, may I speak freely? When have I ever stopped you?" "That woman you've invited, Ms. Davies." Thomas met his eyes in the rearview mirror. "I've seen how you look when you mention her. Whatever this is, it's not a game to you." Mark said nothing. "So why," Thomas continued, "are you treating it like one?" "I'm not. You told your executives it was a prank. You're framing tonight as entertainment for people who wouldn't recognize genuine human connection if it bought them lunch." Thomas pulled to a stop. "That woman said yes to you, Mr. Anderson. Not to them. Maybe start acting like you understand the difference." Mark sat in the back of the car, properly chastened. Thomas was right. He'd been so busy protecting himself, his reputation, his pride, that he'd forgotten Mary and was taking a risk too. Bigger than his, actually. She'd be walking into a room full of people primed to mock her. And she'd said yes anyway. Delighted. The Dorchester's ballroom glittered like a jewelry box, all crystal chandeliers and champagne flutes and people who measured their worth in zeros. Mark worked the room on autopilot, shaking hands, accepting congratulations for the charity's fundraising success, and watching the door. "Where's your special guest?" Gerald appeared at his elbow, scotch in hand, smirk on face. "Don't tell me she chickened out. She'll be here. Right. And I'm sure she'll fit right in with the Duchess of York and the Saudi ambassador." Gerald laughed. "Mark, I love you like a brother, but sometimes your humanitarian impulses override your common sense. You can't just pluck someone from the custodial staff and drop them into." "Gerald." Mark's voice could have frozen vodka. "I'm going to say this once. Whatever you think is happening tonight, you're wrong. And if you embarrass that woman when she arrives, you'll be updating your LinkedIn profile by Monday." Gerald's smirk evaporated. "You're serious?" "Profoundly." 8 o'clock came and went. Mark's chest tightened. Has she changed her mind? Had the enormity of what he was asking, walking into this Shark Tank, finally registered? He couldn't blame her. This was insane. He was insane. What had he been thinking? At 8:15, a murmur rippled through the crowd near the entrance. Mark turned. And forgot how to breathe. Marianne Davies stood at the top of the ballroom stairs like she'd been born for this moment. The woman who cleaned his office in shapeless uniforms had transformed into something that made his 3,000-pound tuxedo feel like a costume. The dress was silver, catching light like starlight on water, molded to curves he'd only imagined existed. But it wasn't the dress. It was the way she wore it, shoulders back, chin high, moving down those stairs with the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly who you were and giving precisely 0 damns about who you were supposed to be. Her hair, usually pulled back in a practical bun, fell in dark waves past her shoulders. Her skin glowed against the silver fabric. And when she reached the bottom of the stairs and her eyes found him across the crowded room, Mark felt something in his chest crack open. She wasn't playing a part. She wasn't pretending. She was just Mary and, fully, devastatingly herself. The ballroom had gone quiet. Every head had turned. The Duchess's mouth hung slightly open. Gerald's Scotch glass had paused halfway to his lips. Even the string quartet seemed to have missed a beat. Marian walked toward Mark through the silence, and as she did, he heard the whispers starting. "Who is that? I don't recognize her. She's stunning. Is she a model?" No one, not one person, recognized her as the janitor from Anderson Global Holdings. Why would they? Wealthy people didn't see the staff. They were furniture, backdrop, invisible. But Marian had never been invisible. Not really. They just hadn't been looking. She stopped in front of Mark, and the corner of her mouth quivered, that familiar expression he'd seen 100 times over cleaning supplies and late-night coffee. "Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice carrying just enough amusement to let him know she saw exactly what was happening. "I believe you invited me." Mark realized he'd been staring like an idiot. He took her offered hand, felt the warmth of her skin, and tried to remember how words worked. "Miss Davies," he managed. "You look delighted," she suggested, and there was that steel-wrapped-in silk humor that had first made him fall for her. He laughed, surprising himself. Devastating. That was the intention. She leaned in slightly, voice dropping. "Though I have to say, the look on your CFO's face might be my favorite part of the evening so far. Is he always that shade of red, or is this special?" Mark glanced over. Gerald looked like he'd swallowed a lemon whole. "Special occasion," Mark confirmed. Then, because he couldn't help himself, "Dance with me?" Marianne's expression shifted, something softer sliding beneath the confidence. "That's what I came for." As he led her to the dance floor, Mark felt the weight of several hundred eyes on them. Let them stare. Let them whisper. For the first time in 3 years, he was touching Marian Davies like she was real, like she was his, like this thing between them might actually exist outside of fluorescent-lit corridors and philosophical debates over trash bins. "You know," she murmured as they began to move, "they're all trying to figure out who I am. Let them wonder." "Oh, I intend to." Her eyes sparkled. "Though eventually someone's going to recognize me. And when they do, Mr. Anderson, this whole evening is going to get very interesting." Mark pulled her closer, breathed in something jasmine and expensive. "I'm counting on it." The waltz was a language Marian spoke fluently, which shouldn't have surprised Mark but did. Everything about her was a revelation wrapped in contradictions. She moved in his arms like she'd been doing this her entire life, which, he was beginning to realize, she probably had. "You're staring," she said, not looking at him. "I'm trying to figure you out." "Good luck with that." "I've been trying for 32 years. 32. He filed that away with all the other crumbs of personal information she'd let slip over 3 years. It wasn't much, she was careful, strategic about what she revealed. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the walls were thinner. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" he asked. "My father insisted. Said a woman should be comfortable in any room she enters." Her lips curved. "Though I doubt he imagined I'd be using those skills at a Billionaire's charity gala while technically being employed to clean said Billionaire's toilets." Mark winced. "You don't clean toilets." "Mr. Anderson, I absolutely clean toilets. Yours included. The one in your private bathroom? You're oddly particular about the hand towels." He had no defense for that. "This is the strangest conversation I've ever had while dancing." "Then you've been dancing with boring people." They turned, and Mark caught sight of his reflection in one of the ballroom's massive mirrors. He looked happy. "I'm actually happy." When did that happen? When had the weight he carried, the constant pressure of building, maintaining, defending his empire, lifted enough that his face forgot to be guarded? "They're starting to circle," Marianne observed. "Your friends. They want an introduction." Mark glanced around. She was right. Gerald had rallied reinforcements, Victoria from legal, James from acquisitions, that insufferable hedge fund manager whose name Mark could never remember. They were forming a sort of reconnaissance mission, champagne flutes raised like shields. "We don't have to do this," he said quietly. "We could leave. Go somewhere else." Marian met his eyes, and for a moment, he saw something raw there. Gratitude, maybe. Or recognition that he'd just offered her an escape route. And missed the show. She smiled, but there was an edge to it now. "No, Mr. Anderson. I didn't put on a dress that cost more than 3 months of my salary just to run away. I came here to dance. So let's dance." 3 months, Marianne, you didn't have to. I didn't buy it. She said it so casually that it took him a moment to process. I borrowed it. From someone who owed me a favor. A significant favor. Before he could ask what kind of favor required a designer gown as repayment, Gerald materialized beside them with the subtlety of a freight train. "Mark. You must introduce us to your lovely companion." Gerald's eyes were calculating, trying to place her. "I don't believe we've met, Ms. Davies," Marianne supplied smoothly. "Marianne Davies. Davies. Davies." Gerald's face was the picture of concentration. Mark could almost see him scrolling through his mental Rolodex of important people. "Any relation to the Surrey Davies family?" "No." Marianne's smile didn't waver. "Much more humble origins, I'm afraid." Victoria, blonde and razor-sharp, stepped forward. "What do you do, Ms. Davies?" "I'm always curious about the fascinating people Mark collects." Collects. Like he was assembling interesting humans for a zoo. Marianne didn't flinch. "I'm in facility management." It was technically true. Also technically a masterpiece of understatement. "How intriguing," James drawled. He was drunk, Mark realized. Which meant he was about to be stupid. "And where exactly do you manage facilities?" "Anderson Global Holdings, actually." The silence that followed was exquisite. Mark watched understanding dawn on Gerald's face first. His CFO had actually paid attention during the budget meetings where custodial contracts were discussed. "You're the..." Gerald's face cycled through several colors. "The janitor?" "The chief custodial officer," Marianne corrected, her voice pleasant as poison honey. "Though yes, Gerald, I do occasionally scrub your toilet. You should really aim better, by the way." Victoria choked on her champagne. James looked like he'd been slapped. Gerald's face had achieved a shade of purple Mark hadn't known existed in nature. "This is your prank?" Victoria hissed at Mark. "You invited the cleaning lady?" "I invited a guest," Mark said, his voice hard enough to cut glass. "The fact that you're shocked she can wear a dress and carry a conversation says more about you than it does about her." "Mark, this is..." Gerald spluttered. "This is humiliating. For her. What were you thinking? She doesn't belong here." "Interesting theory," Marianne said. Her voice had gone quiet, which Mark recognized as dangerous. "Tell me, Gerald, what exactly qualifies someone to belong at a charity gala? The zeros in their bank account? The pedigree of their university? Or perhaps it's just the accident of being born into circumstances where you never had to scrub someone else's toilet to survive?" "I didn't mean..." "Yes, you did." Marianne took a step forward, and Gerald actually retreated. "You meant exactly that. You think the value of a human being is measured by their proximity to wealth. That I'm somehow less than you because I clean up after you. That my presence here is a joke. She turned to the small crowd that had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Mark recognized several board members, a handful of major donors, 2 journalists who definitely shouldn't be witnessing this. Here's what's funny, Mary Ann continued, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. I have a master's degree in international economics from Oxford. I speak 4 languages fluently. I've read every book in Mr. Anderson's office, yes, even the pretentious Dostoevsky he keeps on display but has clearly never opened. And for 3 years, I've listened to all of you talk while I emptied your trash bins, pretending I was invisible because it was easier than acknowledging that the person scrubbing your floors might actually be a human being with thoughts and dignity. Mark's chest felt tight. He'd known she was educated, but Oxford? A master's degree? The questions piled up. Why was she working as a janitor? What had happened? But this wasn't the time. Right now, he just needed to. Mary Ann, he said softly, taking her hand. We're leaving. She turned to him, and he saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. But she blinked them back, lifted her chin. No. We're dancing. I'm not giving them the satisfaction of running me off. They don't deserve. I don't care what they deserve. She pulled him back toward the dance floor. I care that I promised you a dance, and I keep my promises. The crowd parted. The string quartet, bless them, resumed playing. And Mark Anderson held Mary Ann Davies in the center of the ballroom while 300 of London's wealthiest citizens watched with expressions ranging from shock to shame to barely concealed horror. You're magnificent, he whispered. I'm furious, she corrected. But she was smiling through it, a terrible, beautiful smile. Though I have to admit, the look on Gerald's face was almost worth the cost of Uber. Mark laughed, and couldn't help it. Here she was, having just verbally eviscerated his executive team, and she was making jokes about transportation. I'm sorry, he said. For all of this. For letting them think it was a prank. For not being honest about why I really invited you. Mary Ann looked up at him, really looked, and something shifted in her expression. The armor cracked just slightly. And why did you really invite me, Mr. Anderson? The question hung between them, heavy with 3 years of late-night conversations and unspoken truths. Mark could feel the weight of all those eyes on them, could sense his carefully constructed professional life crumbling around him. He didn't care. Because, he said, for 3 years, you've been the only real thing in my entire artificial existence. And I needed to know if what I feel when we talk at 2 in the morning could survive in the daylight. Mary Ann's breath hitched. And I think I just burned down my entire social circle to find out. He smiled. Worth it. You're insane. Probably. Dance with me anyway. She did. They swayed in the center of the ballroom, and gradually, very gradually, other couples joined them. The scandal was already spreading. Mark could see people on their phones, texting, tweeting, probably updating their social media with some version of, "You won't believe what just happened at the Anderson Gala." Let them talk. He was dancing with Mary Ann Davies, and nothing else mattered. This doesn't change anything, she said quietly. Tomorrow, I'm still the janitor. You're still the billionaire. This is still impossible. Is it? Mr. Anderson. Mark. Please. If we're going to make a spectacle of ourselves, the least you can do is use my first name. She smiled, sad and lovely. Mark. This night is beautiful. But it's a fairy tale. And fairy tales end. What if they don't have to? Before she could answer, a woman's voice cut through the music. Mary Ann. Mary Ann Davies. They turned. A woman in her 60s, elegant in midnight blue, was staring at Mary Ann with an expression of absolute shock. Lady Catherine. Mary Ann's face had gone pale. Good God, it is you. Lady Catherine swept forward, ignoring Mark entirely. "Mary Ann Davies. I haven't seen you since the funeral. What on earth are you doing here?" Mark felt Mary Ann's hand tighten in his. "I was invited. By." Lady Catherine's eyes finally landed on Mark. "You?" "Yes," Mark said, though he had no idea what was happening. "I'm Mark Anderson." "I know who you are, young man." Lady Catherine's expression was unreadable. "What I want to know is why you've invited my goddaughter to your gala. And more importantly, why she's been hiding in London for 3 years without telling me she was here." Everything stopped. The music, the dancing, Mark's heart. "Goddaughter?" Mary Ann's eyes closed. When she opened them again, she looked directly at Mark. "I think," she said quietly, "it's time I told you the truth about who I really am." Lady Catherine insisted on a private room. Mark found himself trailing behind the two women, utterly lost, as they were ushered into one of the Dorchester's intimate lounges. The door closed, muffling the scandalized murmurs from the ballroom. "Sit," Lady Catherine commanded, and Mark sat. Mary Ann remained standing, arms crossed, defensive. "You were supposed to call me," Lady Catherine said. "When you arrived in London. That was the agreement. I needed space. For 3 years. Mary Ann, your mother has been." "My mother," Mary Ann interrupted, made her position quite clear. "I'm respecting her wishes by staying away." Mark's head was spinning. "Would someone please explain what's happening?" Lady Catherine turned to him with the imperious look of someone used to being obeyed. "You invited this young woman to your gala without knowing who she was?" "I know exactly who she is." "Do you? Did she tell you she's the daughter of Ghana's former ambassador to the United Nations? That her father was Dr. Kwame Davies, one of the most respected diplomats in modern history?" Mark's mouth went dry. He looked at Mary Ann, who was studying the carpet like it held the secrets of the universe. "She didn't mention it," he said quietly. "Of course she didn't." Lady Catherine sighed. Mary Ann has always had a flair for the dramatic. "Though working as a janitor is extreme, even for you, darling." "It's honest work," Mary Ann said. "It's penance," Lady Catherine corrected. "And it's been 3 years. Don't you think that's enough?" "Enough for what?" Mark asked. He was tired of being lost in this conversation. "Mary Ann, what happened?" She finally looked at him, and the pain in her eyes made his chest ache. "My father died 4 years ago. Heart attack. Suddenly. He was giving a speech at the UN about economic inequality in developing nations, and he just collapsed. Gone before the ambulance arrived." "I'm sorry," Mark said, meaning it. "I was working in international finance at the time. London office, corner view, 7-figure salary. I was good at it, moving money around, making rich people richer. My father was so proud." Her voice cracked. "And then he died talking about the people my job was essentially exploiting, and I realized I'd become everything he fought against." "So you quit," Mark said slowly, understanding dawning. "I quit. Donated most of my savings. Took the most honest job I could find." She smiled, but it was bitter. "My mother called it a mental breakdown. Said I was throwing away everything father worked for. We haven't spoken in 3 years." Lady Catherine made a small sound of distress. "She's hurt, Mary Ann. Not angry. Your mother doesn't understand why you're punishing yourself." "I'm not punishing myself. I'm trying to remember what matters." Mark stood, moved toward her. "And scrubbing toilets helps you remember?" "Yes, actually." Mary Ann's eyes flashed. "Every day, I work. Honest work. I see how the people at the bottom are treated, invisible, disposable. I remember that my father spent his life fighting for their dignity. And I try to be worthy of being his daughter. By making yourself suffer. By making myself useful. Her voice rose. Do you know what it's like to suddenly see your entire life as a lie? To realize you've been part of the problem? I needed to start over, to understand what real work felt like, to stop being insulated from the world by money and privilege. But Mary Ann, Lady Catherine started. And then he had to invite me here, Mary Ann continued, turning on Mark. You had to drag me back into this world. Make me put on an expensive dress and pretend I belong among people who see me as entertainment. Did you think about what that would cost me? What would it mean? Mark felt like he'd been slapped. I thought, I just wanted to see you. Really see you. Not just stolen moments in an empty office. You wanted to show me off. To prove to yourself that the janitor could clean up nice. That's what this was, Mark. An experiment. Your CFO had it right all along. That's not fair. Isn't it? Tears were streaming down her face now, and Mark wanted desperately to wipe them away, but the distance between them felt insurmountable. You invited me as a joke to your friends. You let them think it was a prank. You didn't defend me until I defended myself. I was trying to protect you. I don't need protection. Her voice broke. I need honesty. I need someone who sees me for who I actually am, not who they want me to be. And tonight proved you don't. You see a janitor you've romanticized. A project. A mystery to solve. That's not true. Then why didn't you ask? Mary Ann's voice dropped to a whisper. In 3 years, Mark, you never asked why someone with my education was working that job. You were content to let me be your late-night philosophical janitor because it made you feel interesting. You didn't actually want to know me. You wanted to feel noble for seeing past my uniform. The words hit like bullets. Because she was right, partially right, at least. He'd been curious, yes, but he'd also been careful not to push. Not to intrude. He'd told himself he was being respectful of her boundaries. But maybe he'd just been afraid of what he'd find. Mary Ann, Lady Catherine said gently. That's enough. No, she's right to be angry. Mark's throat felt tight. I'm sorry. For all of it. For not being brave enough to really see you. For making tonight about me instead of us. Mary Ann wiped her eyes, smearing mascara. There is no us, Mark. There never was. Just two lonely people playing pretend in an empty office. She moved toward the door. Lady Catherine caught her arm. Where will you go? Back to my flat. Back to my life. Back to being invisible. Mary Ann looked at Mark one last time. Thank you for the dance, Mr. Anderson. It was lovely. But fairy tales end, remember? I tried to tell you. Then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her with terrible finality. Mark stood frozen, her words echoing in his head. Lady Catherine watched him with something that might have been pity. Well, she said finally. That could have gone better. Mark didn't return to the ballroom. He couldn't face the vultures circling for details, the barely concealed glee of people who thrived on others' humiliation. Instead, he sat in that empty lounge with Lady Catherine, who'd ordered tea like they were discussing weather instead of wreckage. She's not entirely wrong, you know, Lady Catherine said, pouring. About you not asking. I was respecting her privacy. You were protecting yourself. She handed him a cup he didn't want. Asking would have meant risk. Real risk. What if she told you the truth and it changed how you felt? What if knowing she was your equal, your superior, actually, in several respects, made her less appealing? Mark's jaw tightened. That's not. Isn't it? You fell for a janitor, Mr. Anderson. Safe. No threat to your position. A fantasy you could control. Lady Catherine's eyes were sharp. But Mary Ann Davies, daughter of ambassadors, Oxford-educated, fluent in 4 languages, who walked away from everything on principle. That woman is terrifying. She's magnificent. Yes. And you treated her like a novelty. The words stung because they were true. He'd invited her as a guest but framed it as a prank. He'd danced with her but let his friends interrogate her. He'd claimed to see her but never bothered to really look. How do I fix this? He asked. Lady Catherine studied him over her teacup. Can I tell you about Kwame? Mary Ann's father? Mark nodded, desperate for any insight. Kwame Davies was brilliant. Charismatic. He could walk into any room, UN assembly, state dinner, village gathering, and belong utterly. You know why? She didn't wait for an answer. Because he never forgot where he came from. Son of a cocoa farmer, first in his family to attend university. He wore expensive suits and dined with presidents, but he never stopped seeing the people everyone else ignored. Mary Ann said she's trying to be worthy of him. She's trying to prove she hasn't forgotten. That wealth didn't corrupt her the way she believes it corrupts everyone. Lady Catherine set down her cup. Her mother, Abina, thinks Mary Ann is having an extended breakdown. But I think she's searching for something her father had, authenticity in a world of pretense. And I just dragged her back into that world. You invited her to remember who she was before the grief. Before the guilt. Lady Catherine's voice softened. That wasn't wrong, Mr. Anderson. Your execution was terrible, but the impulse was sound. Mark's phone had been buzzing incessantly. He finally looked. 17 missed calls. 43 texts. 3 from Gerald alone. We need damage control. The press is having a field day. Call me immediately. He turned the phone off. What will you do? Lady Catherine asked. I don't know. Mark rubbed his face. She's right that I romanticized her. But she's wrong that I don't see her. I do. I just didn't have the courage to look deep enough. Then find it. The courage, I mean. She won't want to see me. Probably not. Lady Catherine stood, gathering her bag. But here's something about Mary Ann you should know. Her father used to say she inherited his stubborn streak and her mother's pride. Terrible combination. She'll dig her heels in, insist she's fine, push everyone away. Then how? You don't push back. You don't make grand gestures. You simply show up. Consistently. Honestly. And you wait. She paused at the door. Though I'd recommend not showing up at the office on Monday. Give her space to decide whether she's staying or running. After she left, Mark sat alone with cold tea and colder thoughts. Through the walls, he could hear the muffled sounds of the gala continuing, music, laughter, the clink of glasses. His world, spinning on without him. He thought about Mary Ann in that silver dress, head high, taking apart his executives with surgical precision. He thought about 3 years of conversations, every brilliant observation, every gentle challenge to his assumptions. He thought about how she trusted him with that single word, delighted. And he'd failed her. His phone buzzed one final time before dying. A message from an unknown number. She keeps a journal. Blue leather. Sometimes leaves it in her cart when she thinks no one's looking. Maybe start by reading what she actually thinks instead of what you imagine. L.C. Lady Catherine, apparently, believed in information warfare. Mark pocketed his phone and stood. The gala could continue without him. His entire life could continue without him for all he cared. He had more important things to figure out. Like how to prove to Mary Ann Davies that he wasn't the man who'd failed her tonight. He was the man who could become worthy of her truth. What would you sacrifice to prove you truly see someone? Drop your thoughts below. Monday morning, Mark didn't go to the office. He called in sick for the first time in 8 years, ignoring Gerald's increasingly frantic messages about crisis management and reputation repair. Let them manage without him. He had more important things to do. Like sitting in his penthouse, staring at his phone, and not calling Marianne. Lady Catherine's advice echoed, give her space. But space felt like cowardice. Space felt like the same careful distance he'd always maintained, the same respect her boundaries excuse he'd used to avoid real intimacy. Tuesday, he broke. He went to the office at dawn, before anyone else arrived. Took the elevator to the executive floor, half expecting to see Marianne's cart in the hallway. It wasn't there. Different janitor entirely, a young man who nodded nervously and scurried away when he saw Mark. Where's Marianne? Mark asked his assistant, Patricia, when she arrived. Patricia's expression was carefully neutral. Ms. Davies submitted her resignation Friday afternoon, sir. Effective immediately. The floor seemed to tilt. She what? She cited personal reasons. Human Resources accepted it. Patricia hesitated. Sir, if I may, the incident at the gala is all over social media. Perhaps it's better if. Give me her address. I can't do that. Privacy regulations. Patricia. Mr. Anderson, I could lose my job. He softened. Then don't. I'll get it another way. He did. Called in a favor from a former colleague who owed him, got Marianne's address within an hour. A flat in Brixton, modest neighborhood, the kind of place that proved she'd meant what she said about honest living. Mark stood outside the building for 20 minutes, trying to find the courage to ring her bell. A woman leaving the building gave him a suspicious look. Are you selling something? No. I'm here to see someone. That janitor girl? 3rd floor. The woman sniffed. She moved out yesterday. Said something about needing a fresh start. Mark's stomach dropped. Did she say where she was going? Do I look like her diary? She took 2 suitcases and called a taxi. That's all I know. Gone. She was gone. Wednesday, Mark did something he'd never done before. He went to church. Not for religious reasons, he'd never been particularly devout. But because he was desperate, desperate men do desperate things. St. Martin in the Fields. He sat in the back, watching tourists take photos, listening to a choir rehearse something haunting in Latin. A priest noticed him, came over. First time here? Yes. Looking for something specific? Mark almost laughed. Redemption, maybe. Or just answers. The priest sat down beside him, uninvited. The first is possible. The second is rare. Most of us have to settle for better questions. I hurt someone, Mark heard himself say. Someone important. And I don't know how to fix it. Did you apologize? She left before I could do it properly. Ah. The priest nodded knowingly. So you're not here for redemption. You're here for absolution. Those are different things. What's the difference? Redemption requires changing who you are. Absolution is asking someone else to carry your guilt. The priest stood. Figure out which one you actually want. Then you'll know what to do. Thursday, Lady Catherine called. Have you found her? No. Mark was at his desk, staring at paperwork he couldn't focus on. She's vanished. Marianne doesn't vanish. She retreats. Lady Catherine paused. There's a place she used to go. After her father died. When the grief was too much. A cottage in the Cotswolds, belongs to a family friend. Middle of nowhere, no phone signal, just books and quiet. Mark grabbed a pen. Where? I'll text you the address. But Mr. Anderson. Don't go charging in like a knight rescuing a damsel. Marianne doesn't need rescuing. She needs someone who'll sit beside her in the dark and not try to fix everything. I don't know how to do that. Then learn. Friday morning, Mark stood at the door of a stone cottage surrounded by rolling hills and aggressive sheep. The rental car looked absurdly out of place, too shiny and expensive against the pastoral backdrop. He knocked. Waited. Knocked again. The door opened. Mary Ann stood there in jeans and an oversized sweater, no makeup, hair in a messy bun. She looked exhausted. She looked beautiful. She looked like she wanted to slam the door in his face. How did you find me? Her voice was flat. Lady Catherine. Of course. Mary Ann didn't move. What do you want, Mark? To apologize. Properly. Without an audience or ulterior motives or any of the bullshit that ruined Saturday. I don't want your apology. I know. But I need to give it anyway. He held up his hands, showing he carried nothing. 5 minutes. If you still want me gone after that, I'll leave. I'll never bother you again. You have my word. Mary Ann studied him with those intelligent eyes that had first arrested him 3 years ago. Finally, she stepped back. 5 minutes. Start talking. The cottage was small, rustic, filled with books and the scent of wood smoke. Mary Ann didn't offer him tea or a seat. She simply stood by the window, arms crossed, waiting. Mark had rehearsed this. Practiced in the car during the 2-hour drive, refined the words until they were perfect. Now, facing her, every prepared speech evaporated. I've been thinking about what you said, he started. About me romanticizing you. Treating you like a project. And you were right. Partially. He forced himself to hold her gaze. I did romanticize you. But not because you were a janitor. Because you were safe. Mary Ann's eyebrow arched. Safe. You were the only person in my life who didn't want something from me. Who didn't see dollar signs when you looked at me. Who challenged me without agenda. Mark shoved his hands in his pockets. And yes, I never asked about your past because I was afraid. Not of what I'd find, but of losing what we had. We had late-night conversations, Mark. That's all. No. We had a connection. Real connection. The kind I haven't felt since. He stopped, regrouped. My wife died 6 years ago. Car accident. Drunk driver. We'd been married for 8 months. Mary Ann's expression shifted, surprise cracking through the armor. You never mentioned. I won't talk about it. Not to anyone. Mark's throat tightened. Her name was Claire. She was an artist, brilliant, completely unpretentious. She saw through all my corporate bullshit and loved me anyway. When she died, I buried myself in work because it was easier than feeling anything. Mark. And then you showed up. 3 years ago, with your philosophy and your wit and your refusal to be impressed by my money. You made me feel human again. Made me remember that life could be more than quarterly reports and hostile takeovers. He took a breath. But you're right that I didn't have the courage to really see you. Because if I did, if I acknowledged that what I felt was real, I'd have to risk losing someone again. And I couldn't survive that twice. The silence stretched. Mary Ann turned to the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. That's a pretty speech, she said finally. But it doesn't change what happened Saturday. You invited me as entertainment. Let your friends treat me like a circus act. I know. You framed it as a prank because you couldn't admit, even to yourself, that your feelings were real. I know. And when it mattered, when they came at me, you hesitated. Her voice cracked. You let me fight alone. I know. Mark moved closer, carefully. And I can't take that back. Can't undo the hurt. All I can do is tell you the truth now, even if it's too late. Which is? That I'm in love with you. The words came out raw, unpolished. Not with the janitor or the diplomat's daughter or whatever version of you is most convenient. I'm in love with the woman who quotes Dostoevsky while emptying trash. Who takes apart my assumptions with surgical precision. Who walked away from everything because she couldn't live with compromise. His voice dropped. I'm in love with Mary Ann Davies, in all her complicated, brilliant, infuriating glory. And I'm terrified of that. Mary Ann turned, and he saw tears on her cheeks. You don't get to do this. Come here with your dead wife and your pretty words and your... I'm not asking you to forgive me. Or to come back. Or to give me another chance. Mark stayed where he was, giving her space. I'm asking you to let me do what I should have done 3 years ago. Actually, see you. Know you. Not the version I've constructed, but the real you. Why? What difference does it make now? Maybe none. Maybe I've destroyed whatever we had. He pulled something from his pocket, a folded piece of paper. But Lady Catherine was right. I've been imagining who you are instead of asking. So I'm asking now. Tell me about your father. Tell me why you really took that job. Tell me what you're running from, and what you're running toward. And I'll listen. No agenda, no expectations. Just, listening. Mary Ann stared at the paper in his hand. What's that? Your resignation letter. I pulled it from HR before they processed it. Mark set it on the table between them. Your job is still there, if you want it. But more importantly, I'm still here. However you'll have me. Friend, stranger, man learning how to be honest. Your choice. My choice, she repeated softly. Always has been. I just wasn't brave enough to admit it. Mary Ann picked up the resignation letter, unfolded it, and read her own words. When she looked up, something had softened in her eyes. 5 minutes are up, she said. Mark nodded, moved toward the door. His hand was on the knob when she spoke again. My father used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. Her voice was quiet. You came here terrified. That's something. He turned. Is it enough? I don't know yet. Mary Ann wrapped her arms around herself. But you can stay. If you want. There's a pub in the village that does decent fish and chips. And maybe we can start over. Honestly this time. Hope bloomed in Mark's chest, fragile and dangerous. Start over. Hi. I'm Mary Ann Davies. I'm a mess of grief and guilt and questionable life choices. She held out her hand. And you are. Mark crossed the room, took her hand, and felt the warmth of her skin. Mark Anderson. Widower, workaholic, man who's been half alive for 6 years. He smiled. And completely, hopelessly in love with you. The pub was called The Wounded Heart, which Mary Ann found hilarious and Mark found painfully appropriate. They sat in a corner booth, fish and chips between them, 3 years of careful distance finally collapsing into honest conversation. So Oxford, Mark said. International economics. What made you choose that? My father. Mary Ann dragged a chip through vinegar. He believed economic inequality was the root of most global conflicts. Though if I understood the systems, I could help change them. She laughed, bitter. Instead, I became part of the machine. Tell me about the finance job. Kensington office. 18-hour days. I was good at it, derivatives, currency trading, helping wealthy clients get wealthier. My colleagues were brilliant and soulless. I fit right in. She met his eyes. I became someone my father wouldn't recognize. And I didn't notice until it was too late. Until he died. Until he died giving a speech about the people I was helping exploit. Mary Ann's voice wavered. The last conversation we had was an argument. He'd asked me to come home for a family wedding. I said I was too busy. Too important. He said, "Careful, my darling. Busy is just another word for lost." 3 days later, he was gone. Mark reached across the table, covered her hand with his. She didn't pull away. "So you quit everything," he said. "I quit everything. Donated most of my money to causes he cared about. I came to London because I couldn't face going home to Ghana. Couldn't face my mother's grief mixed with disappointment." She turned her hand over, laced her fingers through his. "And I took the first honest job I could find. Custodial work. Simple. Real. No moral ambiguity in cleaning a toilet. Except it wasn't simple. You were punishing yourself. Maybe. Or maybe I was trying to remember what my father taught me, that all work has dignity. That the measure of a person isn't their title or salary, but how they treat people no one else notices." She smiled sadly. "You want to know the real reason I took that job on your floor?" "Yes. I read about you. The Shark of Mayfair. Forbes called you ruthless but fair. Said you never forgot where you came from, grammar school, single mother, built your empire from nothing." Marian squeezed his hand. "I thought maybe if I worked for someone who understood what it meant to climb up from the bottom, I could figure out how to be human again." Mark's throat felt tight. "And did you?" "I did. Because of you." She looked at him properly now, walls finally down. "Those late-night conversations. They saved me. You treated me like I mattered. Not as staff, not as an employee, just as a person whose thoughts were worth hearing. You reminded me that connection was possible. Then why did you run Saturday?" Marian pulled her hand back, but gently. "Because it terrified me. How much I felt. How much I wanted to stay in that ballroom with you, despite everything. I've spent 3 years keeping everyone at arm's length. Easier than risking loss again. And then you looked at me in that dress like I was the only person in the room, and I realized I was in serious trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "The falling in love kind." She said it simply, like admitting the weather. "And I couldn't handle it. So I lashed out, blamed you for things that weren't entirely your fault, and ran." Mark felt something loosen in his chest. "You love me?" "I'm furious about it, but yes." Marian's smile was real now, warm. "You're a billionaire with control issues and terrible taste in ties. You work too much, deflect emotions with humor, and you let your CFO be a pompous ass far too often. Tell me how you really feel. But you're also kind. And curious. And you see people, really see them, in a way most people in your position don't." She leaned forward. "And for 3 years, you've been the best part of my day. Even when you were just Mark Anderson, the billionaire I cleaned up after. Especially then. So where does that leave us?" Marian was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Honestly? I don't know. I'm still figuring out who I am. Still grieving. Still not sure if I belong in your world or if you could ever fit in mine." "What if we built a new world?" Mark suggested. "One that's neither yours nor mine, just ours." "That's very romantic. Also terrifying. We can be terrified together." She laughed, and it sounded like hope. "You know what my father used to say? Love isn't finding someone perfect. It's finding someone whose imperfections fit with yours." Wise man. The wisest. Marian stood, held out her hand. "Walk with me. There's a path through the hills. Stars should be out soon." Mark took her hand, let her lead him out of the pub and into the cool evening. They walked in comfortable silence, fingers intertwined, and for the first time in 6 years Mark felt something shift inside him. Not the grief disappearing, that would always be there. But space opening up beside it. Room for something new. Mark. Marian stopped, turned to face him under a sky just beginning to show stars. Yes. Thank you. For coming here. For being honest. For seeing me. He cupped her face, thumbs brushing her cheeks. Thank you for letting me. When they kissed, it felt like coming home and starting over all at once. Like 3 years of careful distance finally collapsing into something real. Like two broken people finding ways to fit their pieces together. When they pulled apart, Marian was smiling. So what happens now? Mark smiled back. Whatever we want. Together. 3 months later, Mark stood in his office watching Marian work. She'd returned to Anderson Global Holdings, but on her own terms. No longer custodial staff, she'd accepted a position as Director of Corporate Social Responsibility, a role Mark created specifically to harness her brilliance and her father's legacy. Gerald had nearly had an aneurysm. The board had questions. Mark had answers, all of them variations of, because she's the most qualified person I know. Now she was presenting to the executive team, outlining a program to provide living wages and career development for all support staff. Her presentation was surgical, devastating, backed by data they couldn't refute. The optics alone, Gerald protested weakly. The optics, Marian countered, of treating our employees like human beings. Yes, Gerald. Imagine how terrible that would look. Even Gerald had to smile. He'd learned, slowly, painfully, that Marian Davies was a force of nature. You could either get on board or get swept aside. After the meeting, Mark found her in what had become their place, the executive lounge at midnight, her with tea, him with coffee, the city glittering below them. You eviscerated them, he said, settling beside her. I was gentle. For me. She leaned against him, and it still felt like a small miracle every time she did. Your CFO actually complimented my analysis afterward. Character growth. I'm touched. They sat in comfortable silence. This had become their ritual, working late, talking about everything and nothing, building something neither of them had quite believed possible. My mother called today, Marian said quietly. Mark tensed. This was new territory. And Lady Catherine finally convinced her to reach out. We talked for 2 hours. Marianne's voice was thick with emotion. She cried. I cried. She said Father would be proud of what I'm doing. That he'd be proud of who I've become. He would be. She wants to meet you. Mark's heart kicked. When? Next month. She's coming to London. Marian turned to look at him. I told her about us. About you. About how you're helping me honor Father's legacy while building something new. What did she say? She said any man brave enough to fall in love with me deserves a chance. Marian smiled. Though she did ask if you were the same billionaire who caused that social media scandal. I said yes. She laughed. Apparently, Father had similar moments when he was courting her, something about bringing a village girl to a diplomatic dinner. The aristocrats were appalled. How did that turn out? They've been married 40 years. Marian kissed him softly. Turns out my family has a history of inconvenient love stories. Mark pulled her closer. I can live with that. A month later, the Anderson Global Holdings Charity Gala, Round 2. Same venue, same glittering crowd, completely different energy. This time, Marian arrived on Mark's arm. No subterfuge, no pranks, no pretense. She wore deep blue, her father's favorite color, and a small gold pin shaped like a dove that had been his. This time, when they entered, the whispers were different. That's Marian Davies. The new CSR director. I heard she's transforming their entire employee structure. Brilliant woman. Oxford educated. And she's with Mark Anderson. They make quite the pair. Gerald approached, surprisingly gracious. "Miss Davies. You look lovely." "Thank you, Gerald. How's the new diversity initiative coming?" "Ahead of schedule, thanks to your framework." He actually seemed genuine. "I may have underestimated you." "May have?" Mary Ann's eyebrow arched. Gerald laughed. "Definitely did. My apologies. For everything." After he left, Mark whispered, "Did Gerald just apologize voluntarily?" "Miracles happen." Mary Ann squeezed his hand. "Ready to dance?" "Always." This time, when they took the floor, it wasn't a spectacle. It was simply two people who loved each other, dancing. No drama, no hidden agendas, no walls. Lady Catherine appeared beside them as the song ended, Abina Davies at her side. Mary Ann's mother was elegant, regal, and studying Mark with an intensity that made him understand where Mary Ann inherited her presence. "Mr. Anderson." Abina's accent was crisp, her handshake firm. "My daughter speaks highly of you." "The feeling is entirely mutual, Mrs. Davies." "Mama," Mary Ann said softly, and the love in that word was everything. Abina's expression melted. She pulled Mary Ann into a hug that lasted long enough for Mark to look away, giving them privacy. When they separated, Abina turned to him. "Kwame would have liked you. You let my daughter be herself. That's all any parent wants." "She makes it easy," Mark said. "She's extraordinary." "Yes," Abina agreed, smiling at her daughter. "She is." Later, as the evening wound down, Mark found Mary Ann on the balcony, looking at the London skyline. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That 3 years ago, I came to this city broken. And somehow, I found my way back." She turned to him. "With your help. You saved yourself, Mary Ann. I just had the privilege of watching." She kissed him, soft and sure. "We saved each other." And under the London stars, surrounded by the life they were building together, messy, imperfect, and completely real, Mark Anderson finally understood what his late wife Claire had tried to tell him years ago. Love wasn't about perfection. It was about finding someone whose broken pieces fit with yours. Someone who saw you completely and loved you anyway. Someone who walked beside you in the dark without trying to fix everything. Someone like Mary Ann Davies, who'd walked into his life with a mop and changed everything. "Ready to go home?" she asked. Mark took her hand. "With you?" "Always." They walked out of the gala together, no longer the billionaire and the janitor, but simply Mark and Mary Ann. Two people who'd found each other against impossible odds and built something worth keeping. Behind them, the ballroom sparkled. Ahead of them, the future waited. And for the first time in 6 years, Mark Anderson wasn't afraid of it. The end. Sometimes the people who change our lives are the ones we almost overlook. Have you ever discovered someone was extraordinary when you finally took the time to truly see them? Share your story in the comments, we'd love to hear it.